They told me it was for the community. That was their excuse. For words, spit out like a slogan. The kind you and #39D find on a pamphlet or a banner hung up outside a new strip mall. They used those 4 words like they were sacred, like they were a shield that could deflect guilt, truth, and history all in one go. But that community didn't grow up here. They didn't bleed in these fields. They didn't bury pets in the garden or carve initials into the barn rafters. They didn't know what it was like to lose a crop to drought, or to feel the sting of blisters from fence wire and summer heat. This land was passed down through 3 generations of Cartwrights. My grandfather, Henry, built the original well by hand. My father, Walt, expanded the orchard until it doubled in size. Me, I just tried to hold on to it. And then they came for it. It started subtle. HOA flyers showing up in my mailbox, even though I wasn't part of their neighborhood. They were always neat, printed on thick glossy paper, filled with stock images of happy families walking leashed dogs beneath blue skies. I ignored them at first. Thought they were just trying to lure me in, like those real estate agents who leave notes offering to buy your property for cash, no questions asked. Then came the invitation to a community improvement meeting. They called it a courtesy. I didn't attend. I was busy repairing a busted irrigation line from a rough winter frost. 2 weeks later, I got a formal letter. It wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was a declaration. Part of my land was to be rezoned for public recreational use, approved by the county and backed by the HOA. I stood in my kitchen, letter trembling in my hand, reading that last sentence over and over. Rezoned. As if they could just rewrite the history of this place with one signature and a smug smile. I drove straight to the county office. Waited in line. Got shuffled from desk to desk like I was asking for some lost library book. Finally, a young clerk brought up the file on her screen and said, "Yep, it and #39S approved. HOA submitted the petition 6 months ago. You had 30 days to appeal." 30 days from when? I asked. She blinked. From when the public notice went up. Where? Posted on the HOA website, she said, like that explained everything. I left with nothing. No power, no say, no way to turn back time. They hadn't mailed me anything but fluff. They never rang my doorbell, never gave me a chance to speak. 3 days later, the trucks arrived. Not construction trucks, surveyors, clipboard holders, the type who wear polos tucked into khakis and talk like everything is already decided. One of them walked right up to my fence and asked if I had any questions before they started laying boundary markers. Boundary markers. They hadn't even waited for me to move my tools. One of their guys tripped over a coil of drip line near the apple trees and acted like I was the problem. I told them they were on private property. They told me the property line had changed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch with my coffee going cold, the old wind chime clinking in the dark. I watched the blinking lights of their survey gear down by the orchard line. They had no idea what they were doing. No idea what they were waking up. The next morning, I found bright pink spray paint across 3 of my oldest trees. Big X marks. Like targets. I touched one of the trunks. I remembered the summer I planted it, how small it was. My dad had helped me pick the right spot. South-facing, good drainage, plenty of light. That tree gave fruit for almost 20 years. They were going to rip it up for a fenced-in dog play area. I called the HOA. Left a message. Then I showed up at their office the next day. It was a converted townhouse with a little brass plaque out front. I asked for the chairwoman, someone named Judith Holloway. A young assistant said she wasn't in. I waited in my truck for over an hour. Finally, she showed up in a Lexus, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf like she thought she was hiding from paparazzi. I stepped out and introduced myself. "Mr. Cartwright," she said, like she'd practiced it. I told her what they were doing wasn't right. That it wasn't theirs to take. She smiled politely and said, "I understand this is difficult, but the vote passed. The land is being improved for everyone's benefit." "For everyone but the person who owns it," I said. She didn't flinch. Just handed me a printed packet titled Project Timeline and Key Benefits. I didn't even look at it. I threw it into the passenger seat of my truck and drove home. A week later, they started digging, clearing brush, flattening the land where I used to keep goats. When I was a boy, the noises woke me up at 6 a.m., the grinding hum of machinery chewing through roots and soil. I stood on my porch, fists clenched at my sides, heart thudding against my ribs. That's when I remembered the well. Not the new one that fed the farmhouse and barn. The old one. The one my grandfather dug back in the 1950s. It had been modernized a few times. New pump, new pipes, but it still worked. And a few decades ago, when the HOA first built their neighborhood, they struck a deal with my father, share a portion of that water, just enough for some common areas and a few homes along the edge. There was no contract, just a handshake, a favor between neighbors. But now those neighbors had turned into trespassers, into thieves, and they were still drinking from my well. I walked out that night, under a pale sky, flashlight bobbing in my hand, boots crunching on gravel. The well house stood quiet, hidden beneath tall grass and a rusted corrugated roof. Inside, the pipes gleamed with dew. I knew every valve by heart. I shut them all. Every one. The pump whined for a second before falling silent. And I waited. 2 days later, the phone rang. A neighbor from 2 lots down. Friendly guy used to bring over plums in the summer. He said, "Hey James, any idea why we've got no water pressure?" "Nope," I lied. The next call was from a woman I'd never met. She accused me of sabotage. Said she had kids who couldn't bathe. I asked her if she'd ever seen what a bulldozer does to a fruit grove. She hung up. That evening, Maggie arrived. She was one of the old-timers, been here since before the HOA took over. We used to talk over the fence when I was a kid. She brought pie and quiet concern. "I know they're pushing you," she said. "But shutting off their water?" I didn't answer. She left the pie on the porch. The next morning, a man in a cheap suit knocked on my door. Legal rep. HOA letterhead. Emergency meeting scheduled. Threats of litigation. Words like easement, breach, liability. I read the paper, smiled once, and handed it back. "Water's a funny thing," I said. "When you have it, you don't think twice. But when it stops." He didn't stay long. The news came the day after. Not big city media. Just a local reporter, fresh out of college. Desperate for a story that might go viral. She said she'd heard rumors about a water war with the HOA. I didn't confirm or deny anything. I just told her about the trees, the goats, the pink paint. She asked, "Why not fight in court?" I looked her in the eye and said, "Some fights aren't about winning. They're about making sure they remember who they're messing with." And that was just the beginning. The local news report aired that evening. It wasn't flashy. Just a 30-second segment toward the end of the broadcast, wedged between a story about a farmer's market and a weather warning. But it was enough. The footage showed survey flags fluttering like little claims to stolen land, children walking with empty water bottles, and my silhouette in the background, standing by the well house, unmoving, unreadable. They blurred my face. Didn't need to show it. The voiceover said more than enough. A local dispute over land rights and water access has ignited tensions in the quiet community of Ridgeway Pines, the anchor said. One man says he's standing up for his family's legacy. The HOA claims he's endangering residents. But who really owns the water? The comments exploded overnight. Someone clipped the segment and posted it online. Then, someone else added dramatic music and labeled it, HOA gets a taste of their own medicine. A Reddit thread called me, Water Daddy. Another called me, the Thirst Avenger. I didn't care about going viral. I cared about truth. And truth was something the HOA had no stomach for. The day after the report aired, two things happened. First, my mailbox was torn off its post. Bent metal and splinters scattered across the gravel. No note, no claim. Just vandalism. Second, a young woman showed up at my gate. She didn't belong to the HOA, at least not officially. Said her name was Leah. Said she ran a blog that documented HOA abuse stories across the country. She'd driven 2 hours just to meet me. I want to hear your side, she said. I invited her in, poured black coffee and sat on the porch while she recorded everything on a small mic clipped to her collar. I told her everything. About the rezoning. About the orchard. About the letter they buried in bureaucracy and never bothered to deliver properly. She listened. She didn't interrupt or nod too eagerly. She just let it settle. When she left, she thanked me. Her post went up 2 days later, titled, The Man Who Shut Off the HOA. That's when it really started snowballing. Emails came in from strangers. Some from other states. They shared photos of their own battles, HOAs who fined them for their paint color, who cut down heritage trees, who micromanaged gardens. Some people offered legal help. Others offered prayers. But not everyone was cheering. The HOA chairwoman, Judith, doubled down. Released an official statement through their lawyer. Mr. Cartwright is engaging in reckless retaliation against a democratically approved community project. His behavior has endangered dozens of families. Funny how they used the word community like a weapon. That week, 2 board members resigned. I didn't know them, had never spoken to them. But apparently, the pressure was mounting. Lawsuits were being whispered about. An audit had been requested by one of the homeowners. Things were unraveling. And the water still off. I drive through town and see lawn chairs in dry yards, brown patches on grass where sprinklers used to run at full blast. HOA signs promoting the dog park project had been graffitied with words like liars and thieves. People started noticing something else too, the power the HOA had accumulated over the years. How they'd voted themselves into lifetime roles. How fines for minor violations kept increasing, while transparency got murkier. My silence said more than their speeches. Maggie returned, this time with a pie that didn't wobble like a guilty conscience. She said her neighbor, Dana, had started a petition to halt construction on the park. Half the block signed it already, she said. You got rattled. I wasn't doing it to rattle anyone. I just wanted what was mine left alone. But I nodded, thanked her, and handed back the empty tin from last time. 2 nights later, they tried to reroute the water. I caught them just after midnight. 3 men in vests with flashlights, working quietly near the back fence where the main pipe ran underground toward the neighborhood. They didn't see me coming. Evening, I said, stepping into the beam of their lights. They jumped. One of them tried to claim they were checking for leaks. I pointed to his truck parked at the bottom of the hill. Unmarked. No county plates. Leave, I said. They left. Next day, I added locks to the valve room. Bolted the access panel. I wasn't a violent man, but I was done being polite. The HOA responded with a cease and desist. Their lawyer came back with slicked back hair and a fresh copy of the same threats. He used big words: emergency injunction, public endangerment, civil negligence. I let him talk. When he was done, I asked him a question. Ever lost something you spent your whole life protecting? He hesitated. What do you mean? Not money, I said. Not status. Something you can't replace. Something soaked in memory. He shifted his briefcase. This isn't personal, Mr. Cartwright. It is to me, I said. And soon, it'll be personal to you too. They tried going to court. The judge kicked it down the line. No immediate hearing date. County legal backlog. In the meantime, the HOA couldn't force me to restore the water without a ruling. I took the win quietly. And the town. They kept watching. Leah's story hit bigger outlets. One podcast episode turned into 3. People began calling my story the slowest rebellion in HOA history. Support grew. A fund was set up online. Help James Cartwright save his land. I didn't start it, but I appreciated it. Some people sent cash. Others mailed tools. Someone sent a crate of bottled water with a note. Let them try and take this. But with attention came backlash. One morning, I woke up to find the barn doors wide open. Not broken, just opened. Tools scattered inside. Nothing stolen. Just disturbed. A warning, maybe. I installed cameras. That same week, the county sent a mediator, a neutral party to try and resolve the conflict. Without escalation. Her name was Claire. She wore sensible shoes and didn't pretend to know everything. I'm not here to tell you what to do, she said. I just want to find out what happened. So I told her. She sat with me on the porch for 2 hours. Took notes. Didn't rush me. Before she left, she asked, "What would make this right for you?" I said, "An apology. And the land back." She sighed. "I can work on the first. The second might take time." I nodded. Time I had. The next HOA meeting turned into a circus. Someone recorded it. Uploaded the whole thing. Homeowners shouting. Board members flustered. One woman screaming that the park had never even been voted on properly. The truth was unraveling. Fast. Then came the storm. A real one this time. Heavy wind, sideways rain, branches snapping like brittle bones in the wind. Power lines fell. The neighborhood plunged into darkness. But not my house. I'd installed solar years ago. Didn't like being reliant. Didn't trust the grid. That night, while the rest of the street was dark, my porch glowed like a lighthouse. And then, they came. One by one. Flashlights bobbing. Children wrapped in blankets. Parents with red eyes. They knocked. Not angry. Not demanding. Just tired. Do you have heat? Do you have light? Do you have water? I looked at them. Saw their faces not as enemies, but as people. Neighbors. Victims of a system they didn't fully understand. Maybe even resented. I didn't say a word. I stepped aside and opened the door. They didn't say much when they stepped inside. Some of them looked ashamed. Others just looked cold. There were kids among them, faces flushed, teeth chattering from the storm. Maggie came too. She'd brought blankets and her bad cookies. And that night, under the soft flicker of emergency lanterns and firelight, we sat together in silence. Nobody talked about the HOA. Nobody talked about the park. Not at first. They asked if I had enough water for everyone. I nodded. One man, I think his name was Alan, he ran the HOA's finance committee, stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed. He'd fined me once for visual disharmony, because I left an old wagon wheel against my fence. Now he was using that same wheel as a footrest while his daughter napped in one of my chairs. The irony tasted better than any pie Maggie ever baked. Hours passed. Stories started to spill, quiet at first, but soon with urgency. Did you hear how they raised dues again last year without notice? They made Dana repaint her shutters 3 times in one summer. They fined me $75 because my garden hose wasn't coiled properly. They threatened to sue me because my husband hung a flag off the wrong hook. I sat back, listening, observing. Every one of them had a grievance, a scar left by the very system they had upheld. They hadn't spoken up then. But now, when the heat was off, and the food was scarce, and the kids couldn't flush toilets, they remembered what mattered. The power didn't come back for 2 days. During that time, my home turned into a sort of refuge. A strange purgatory where pride broke down and people became human again. They brought over casseroles and flashlights. They offered to help around the farm, feeding the chickens, stacking wood, anything to show they weren't just HOA mouthpieces anymore. And slowly, the fog lifted. On the 3rd day, the lights returned. And one by one, they left, thanking me softly, looking me in the eye like they meant it. Not as a neighbor, as a man, as someone who had stood alone when no one else dared. But not everyone changed. Judith, the chairwoman, didn't show her face. She'd gone quiet ever since the second resignation. And the news coverage blew up. Rumor had it she was taking a leave of absence. Her house sat dark every night. No one saw her come or go. I didn't need her apology anymore. What I wanted was justice. And it came. The county held an emergency hearing after the petition hit 2,000 verified signatures. The rezoning was declared invalid. The process had been rushed, and several steps had been bypassed. Public notice, community forum, environmental survey, all skipped. Judith's dog park was now officially dead. But the damage had already been done. The orchard would never be the same. The fence lines were crooked now, earth mangled by tires and careless hands. Still, I walked those rows every morning, boots damp with dew, fingers trailing along the bark of what remained. One day, while I was out there, I found something wedged between 2 roots, one of the old pink flags they'd used to mark trees. I pulled it out and stared at it, kept it, tacked it to the wall in my tool shed. A reminder. Later that week, a box arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was a printed photograph, black and white, slightly blurred. It was of the original well being dug, dated 1957. My grandfather, shirtless and sunburned, standing next to the rig, smiling. There was a note on the back. You kept his promise. Thank you. I never found out who sent it. Some days, the story still lived online. People shared clips, memes, dramatic retellings. A podcast host dubbed me the quiet storm of Ridgeway Pines. I laughed at that. I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to be left alone. But the thing about standing your ground is, sometimes it creates a ripple. People wrote letters to their HOAs, challenged fees, voted out long-standing board members. I started getting updates, emails, screenshots, photos of new rules being reversed. It was happening. Change. Real change. And not because of a lawsuit or some grand speech. Because of a well. Because of silence. Because someone remembered what mattered. Then, in early spring, the orchard bloomed again. Not as thick as before, but strong. Resilient. The trees that had survived stood tall, branches stretching like arms ready to embrace the sun. I planted 6 new saplings. Gave them names. One was Henry. Another was Walt. Legacy doesn't come from paper. It comes from soil. I never turned the water back on for the HOA. Not officially. They were forced to reroute their systems. The county helped, under pressure from the state. It took them months. And in the meantime, they learned what drought feels like. Not in the land, but in the soul. When you can't control someone, when you can't silence them or buy them off, you're left with one choice: respect. That was the real win. It wasn't the rezoning reversal, or the media attention, or the viral fame. It was the way people started looking at me again. Not as a holdout. Not as a grumpy old man with a fence and a shovel. But as a man who remembered what it means to fight for something bigger than convenience. I kept the valves locked. But I left the shed door open. Not as a threat. As a reminder. One evening, Maggie came by. We sat on the porch again, just like always. She brought lemonade this time, not pie. You know, she said, I think they finally get it. I nodded. Watched the wind sway the branches in the field. Sometimes, I said, you have to turn the water off to make people thirsty for truth. She smiled. That sounds like something your grandfather would have said. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But either way, it was mine now.